Before the story begins, remember this. To the ancient Greeks, the harvest was not merely weather, it was the heartbeat of the world. If the earth stopped sending up green shoots, people would go hungry, rites would fall silent, and even the divine order would begin to tremble. That is why the tragedy of Demeter and Persephone is not just the private grief of one family on Olympus, but a fracture that spreads into every field under mortal feet. Here, a decision signed in silence can drag winter out long past its season, and a single, insignificant bite can bind an entire fate. And from the instant the ground opens beneath that flowered meadow, everything begins to slide into a turning cycle no one can stop in time. Each year, before the ancient Greeks pressed the first grains into the waiting soil, they held rites for Demeter, the goddess of agriculture and the harvest, as a way of reminding themselves that life does not simply arrive unbidden, and that food is never merely a matter of having enough to eat, but a matter of order, of balance, of how the world is kept from slipping into chaos. On the surface of the earth, a meal is the reward of labor, the gentle sweetness of a successful season, the warm certainty that tomorrow still exists and hope has somewhere to live. But in the land of the dead, the same act of eating carries an entirely different meaning, because it is understood as a quiet consent to belong to that darkness forever. Demeter knows this with the instinct of a deity bound to dirt and root, and the long cycle of sprouting and withering. And she tends the fields not only as sacred work, but as a vow to humankind. At her side is Persephone, a daughter raised in sunlight, in the scent of wet earth and the first flowers of the year, carrying both the clear brightness of a young woman and the symbolic weight of life unfolding before the eye. To the Greeks, the two of them were never just characters in a tale. They were an answer to ordinary, urgent questions. Why seeds take hold? Why fields return to green after the cold? And why, sometimes, the whole world can suddenly turn barren, as if someone has pulled the breath from the ground. And yet, to enter this story honestly, we have to accept that Greek myth does not run on modern moral standards, especially when it comes to love and marriage, where power so often stands above feeling, and consent is not always something anyone pauses to weigh. Many of these old narratives lean on motifs that today make the skin prickle. Abduction, coercion, arrangement, and the silence of those in authority, treated as if it were simply part of the social order. That is why modern retellings so often try to sand down the sharpest edges, not necessarily to deceive an audience, but because every storyteller is also a person of their own time, and people want a story they can bear to hear, a story they can relate to, a story that can still inspire. We are used to gods presented as lofty ideals, used to the edited versions passed through children's books and films and pop culture, where Zeus becomes little more than a capable father with many children, where Olympus shines clean and bright, and the darker details are pushed to the margins. But when you return to the ancient sources, the dissonance hits immediately. We look at an action and name it sin, while an ancient society might have treated it as mechanism. We call it tragedy, while an older teller might have treated it as explanation. Out of that gap, a particular bias takes root, one that makes Hades easier to frame as a villain than almost anyone else, simply because he is king of the underworld, and because below, in the modern imagination, so readily collapses into hell under the heavy influence of Christian-inflected thinking. And so, even though myth offers no shortage of Olympian gods with cruel and ambiguous love stories, they are often retold as familiar figures who are forgiven, while Hades is cast as Greek Satan in countless popular interpretations. But if you look closely at the structure of the story, you begin to see that the tragedy is not only in the surface act. It is in the machinery of power behind it, in decisions made on the heights of Olympus, as if a young woman's fate could be signed away without her voice, or her mother's. And that is why, in telling the story of Demeter and Persephone in a documentary style, we should not begin with romance or sweet promises, but with the most fundamental question of all. Who is allowed to choose? Who is stripped of choice? And why a single divine decision forces the human world to learn how to live with winter. Persephone vanishes, not with the gentleness of a farewell, but with the brutal force of stone torn open beneath her feet, as if the ground itself is being compelled to make room for a fate decided long before she ever stepped into the light. In many versions, the moment unfolds in a field of flowers, where she is carefree amid brightness and fragrance, when a narcissus trembles in a way it shouldn't, and then the earth suddenly fractures, so that from the let, a black chariot surges upward like a spear, piercing the calm skin of the world. Hades, lord of the underworld, offers no greeting and no explanation, because what he does reads less like a conversation than a procedure. He reaches up, tears Persephone from the realm of wind and sun, flings her onto his war car, and plunges back down into the ground through collapsing rock and choking dust. Behind them, the fissure seals so quickly that there is barely time to register the depth of that yawning dark before everything returns to itself, leaving only a cold absence where a young woman's laughter had been a heartbeat ago. Another strand of the myth lays a veneer of disaster and omen over the same tragedy, as though nature itself is announcing a shift in the border between life and death. Mount Etna erupts with violence. The earth shudders as if something enormous is thrashing beneath Zeus's chains, and those tremors make Hades fear that his shadowed kingdom will crack, that light will spill into a place meant to have no dawn at all. He rises to the surface to watch, but the very act of leaving his realm sets off another chain of interference, because Aphrodite and Eros have been watching Persephone, and they do not like goddesses who refuse love, who keep themselves untouched, as though the authority of desire cannot reach them. Eros looses his sharpest arrow, invisible but fatal. And when Hades sees Persephone, longing ignites so completely that it is no longer a thought, but a driving command, pushing him into haste like a man who does not have time to ask himself what he is doing. But whether you tell it as Eros's lightning strike or as a cold-blooded arrangement, the story always carries a layer of power underneath it, where Zeus, as Persephone's father, has approved a marriage without her consent and without Demeter's blessing. And so the abduction becomes more than one individual's violence. It becomes the signature of a system. It is a system that allows Persephone to be hauled from the earth like a gift passed from hand to hand, that lets her cry vanish beneath the grind of wheels over stone, and that ensures the world above does not yet understand that the moment the earth closes, a crisis has already begun. Not only for one divine family, but for life itself, which depends on the mercy of Demeter. The moment Demeter realizes Persephone is no longer at her side, the world seems to lose its familiar rhythm. Because a mother can endure many things, but a daughter vanishing from the earth as if swallowed whole cannot be dismissed as an accident. She rushes to the place where Persephone had been standing and finds the ground already sealed, as though it had never been cut open at all. No footprints, no answering cry, only a cold blankness, that hurts to look at. By instinct, Demeter goes to Olympus because that is where the gods like to claim they know everything. But this time, knowing arrives wrapped in an unsettling silence, as if everyone can see the tragedy unfolding and still chooses to turn away. That silence is not innocent. Many witnessed the abduction, and many also knew of an agreement made beforehand, in which Zeus approved the marriage like an administrative decision, requiring neither the girl's consent nor the mother's. Shut out with evasive glances, Demeter is forced to search on her own, following rumor, probing every vague sign until she meets Hecate, goddess of the underworld and of magic, who says she did not see it with her own eyes, but heard Persephone being dragged away in panic. And when every trail leads only into uncertainty, Demeter turns to Helios, the sun who looks down on all things, because on that fateful day, his gold light swept the meadow, enough to catch the black wheels plunging into the earth and to understand that this was not a disappearance, but a taking done on purpose. In fury and desperation, Demeter does what only a harvest goddess can do. She withholds life from the land, not as petty vengeance, but as a declaration that if her child is kept beneath the ground, then the ground will stop giving food to humankind. Fields wither as if drained, seeds lie inert in cold mud, fruit drops before it can ripen, and famine spreads like a sickness with no cure, touching every roof, every hand that has ever lived by the harvest. As mortals begin to die in great numbers, the gods finally see the terrible paradox clearly. If humanity disappears, who will worship them? Who will bring offerings? Who will speak their names in prayer and gratitude? Zeus tries to command Demeter back to her duties, then tries sending messengers and gifts to persuade her. But everything is meaningless, because to Demeter, no gift can replace Persephone. And in that moment, the crisis stops being the private grief of one divine family and becomes a survival problem for the entire cosmic order, forcing Olympus to reckon with the cost of its silence. And while the earth above grows colder in the absence of crops, Persephone below is waging her own protest, quiet but unyielding, because she understands that if she accepts the role Hades is pressing onto her, she will lose the road home entirely. Hades expects her to be a wife, a queen, but Persephone refuses his overtures the way she refuses the darkness closing around her, and she chooses to starve. Because food in the land of the dead is not just food. It is a tether. But resistance does not soften hunger, and the longing for her mother, for sunlight, for the laughter of friends grinds down her will the way wind grinds stone. In the underworld's hushed gardens, Persephone passes pomegranate branches heavy with fruit, sees the red seeds glinting like drops of blood in the dark, and in that moment of weakness, she eats a few, an act so small it seems meaningless, and yet enough to turn return into an agonizing negotiation. Because from here on, the story is no longer simply bring Persephone back up, but how do you pull her from a place she has already touched? And that forces all of Olympus into the next chapter. The chapter of bargaining, of pact, and of the price that must be paid for a spring. Once famine has spread far enough that Olympus can no longer pretend it isn't happening, Zeus is forced to do what he tried to avoid from the beginning. Admit that a decision signed in silence can bring the entire world down, and that negotiation is no longer a preference, but the only road left if cosmic order is going to hold. Hermes is sent into the underworld as a messenger between two realms, crossing the ice-cold Styx and the shadowed corridors where every word falls with the weight of stone, to meet Hades and deliver the blunt reminder that Demeter is letting the earth die, and that if humankind dies with it, divine glory becomes meaningless. In many tellings, Hades does not object to Persephone returning to see her mother, and he even speaks more softly than usual. But the problem is that Persephone has eaten pomegranate seeds, and the law of the dead does not allow anyone who has tasted its food to leave forever as if they had never set foot below. And so, instead of a full rescue, Olympus can reach only an agreement, an uneasy compromise cast out of desperation and power. Persephone will split her life in two, one portion belonging to light and one portion belonging to shadow, with the ratio shifting by storytelling tradition. Some say 2/3 on Earth and 1/3 in the underworld. Others divide it evenly, half the year and half. But whatever the number, the core remains the same. Persephone is no longer a maiden who belongs only to spring. She becomes the hinge between worlds, someone permitted to return and compelled to go back. From the moment Persephone steps onto the earth again, the story is no longer merely an abduction that has been handled, but a new rule carved into human life. Because Demeter, reunited, immediately does what only she can do. She brings the harvest back to life, the way you call a soul into its body. The ground softens, shoots break through, flowers spill over the spaces that had been barren, and mortals look on that miracle as a promise that death is not an absolute ending. Spring arrives, and then summer stretches out with warm sun and green fields. Not because Persephone carries spring with her, in the romantic sense so many modern readings prefer, but because her presence ends Demeter's grief. And when Demeter's grief ends, the earth is allowed to breathe again. But every pact comes due, and when Persephone must descend to the underworld once more, Demeter's joy halts as if its foundation has been pulled away, and sorrow pours outward into weather. Darkness comes earlier, winds sharpen, trees slow, soil hardens, and winter arrives like an extended form of mourning. Over years of watching it happen, humans learn to adapt. They store their crops, stoke their fires, and wait for the months Persephone will return. Because for them, the world's calendar is not measured only by the sun, but by the grief and joy of a divine mother. But if we stop here, we have told only the familiar season explanation, while the ancient tradition leaves enough traces to suggest that Persephone is not simply a gentle spring goddess hauled below, but a powerful being of death, sometimes spoken of with titles that make people hesitate to say her name plainly. Before she is told, as the girl gathering flowers, she is Kore, the maiden, a name both innocent and evasive, as though it were meant to slide past something dangerous. And in more secret traditions, she appears as Despoina, the mistress, whose true name may be forbidden to speak, because to name is to draw attention from the dark. At Eleusis, the Demeter-Persephone story becomes the heart of the Eleusinian mysteries. Initiation rites kept so tightly sealed that history can only hear their echo. But people believed that each year, Persephone's journey down, staying, rising was reenacted as a promise of rebirth. Farther back still, Mycenaean clues and Linear B script suggest that Demeter and Persephone may have held a very early place in worship, while Hades appears fainter in the oldest layers, leading many scholars to speculate about shifts in names and roles across the long history of the gods. And because the story is this complex, it becomes fertile ground for misunderstanding and retelling. Some emphasize the violence of abduction in the modern sense, while others build a Persephone chose it version, as a contemporary wish to give agency back to the character. And from that impulse come countless modern works, from romantic webcomics to games and musical theatre, each one choosing its own angle of light. But no matter how you tell it, the final rule stands as steady as stone. Don't confuse the beauty of a compromise with the fairness of what caused it. Because spring may return, but the mark of a stolen choice does not disappear. It only turns into the steady, repeating rhythm of the season.